Julie Ford has managed celebrity portfolios, advised homelessness charities, worked in housing law and mediated landlord disputes, among many other roles within the property industry.
The private rented sector comes with 169 laws and 402 regulations. I know, and I know them all.
And as founder of Lettings Advice Service and a trusted media voice, she's literally written the book on UK property rules.
So we look at things like VAT on the room rates, for example. VAT would take you into a commercial setting. As a live-in host, you certainly are somebody who takes it outside of the commercials, as well as not having staff. That is something else, because obviously if you have staff, that's a business.
Julie, welcome to the Airbnb Superhost podcast. Julie, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And I've given you the tour of the house, so you've seen what I'm doing and how it all works. And the big differentiator that I've lived by and throughout my entire career is I'm a live-in host, not an absent host, by which I mean I am not using Airbnb as a portal for short-term lettings. So you are the perfect person to ask absolutely, am I correct?
Yeah, absolutely, you are correct.
Really?
Because it's about differentiating between a live-in host and whether you are running a commercial business. So we look at things like VAT on the room rates, for example. VAT would take you into a commercial setting, because obviously it's what most businesses charge and it's business deductible. Other things such as the occupants being able to have their rooms moved around at a minute's notice. That again gives moves it away from the commercial element. But yeah, absolutely. As a live-in host, you certainly are somebody who takes it outside of the commercials, as well as not having staff. That is something else, because obviously if you have staff, that's a business. So yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, well, I was explaining how I fill the rooms up, and people will book a room. People who are regular, I'll put them into one room, and then when they turn up, I say, "Oh, by the way, you're in another room." So they go, "Great." I mean, they're all nice rooms. So when you talk to people about living and hosting, what are the common misconceptions?
I think the most common misconception is they believe that it comes with a lot of legislation. Because obviously the private rented sector does, it comes with 169 laws and 402 regulations. When you move into, I know, and I know them all, when you move into hosting or even taking lodgers, and again, there's a difference there between the two, you have to understand that the occupants don't have as much protection for their security of tenure, and also when it comes to being evicted. They don't have protection from the Housing Act, they don't have protection from Eviction Act 1977, so they can pretty much be turfed out with just, their time has come to an end, they've paid for 3 days, their 3 days is over, off you go, son. That's it. They have nothing to sort of come back with.
Yeah.
The only thing you're covered by realistically is consumer protection, because they are your customer at the end of the day. But again, that's minimal, because as long as you do your role correctly and you are providing them with a good customer service, it's not really much they can come back for.
Yeah. I have had over 17,500 pillow nights. So if you stay for 3 nights, that would be 3 pillow nights. And, well, frankly, everybody, well, I can't say everybody, that's a bit too naive, but I cannot think of anybody that I have disliked. Mm-hmm. It has been amazing. And one question about, you touched on it, the difference between a lodger and a guest. There is a rent the room scheme. Mm-hmm. Is that just for lodgers, or is that part-time hosting like I'm doing? How does the rent the room scheme work?
So rent a room scheme is predominantly for lodgers, because it's somebody who's going to use that dwelling as their main and principal home. That's the difference.
Simple as that.
As simple as that.
So what's the first thing that you would tell someone who comes to you panicking about, I'm going to get in trouble if I'm listing a room?
I'm going to say that there may be a possibility of getting in trouble as long as they have looked at everything first. So first of all, do they own the property? That's the first thing. If you're renting yourself, then there may be restrictions in your own tenancy agreement that don't allow you to take a lodger or have a guest or rent it out in any way, shape or form. But if it's your own property, then there shouldn't really be much of an issue. There's very unlikely to be any covenants that will, prevent you from having guests. But there may be something that prevents you from having multiple guests. So obviously with yourself, you have, was it 8 rooms available?
Something like that, yeah.
In an ordinary dwelling, there may be a restriction on doing something like that. For example, if you're in a leased block of flats, there may be a restriction on the number, but there certainly won't be a blanket restriction.
Yeah.
But if you're renting, there possibly might be. And again, if you are thinking of moving back into your buy-to-let property, you'd need to change those mortgage terms, because obviously it's not a residential mortgage, it's a buy-to-let mortgage. If you're living in there and starting to rent out the rooms, just speak to the lender, get those terms changed.
With my home insurance, my buildings insurance, I told them what I was doing and said, and some people book with me directly, so please can I be insured for them? They said, yeah, sure. And they said, we'll insure you for 8 people on site. And I said, can you make it 10? They said, yeah, okay.
Exactly. As long as you have conversations with
Yes.
these people, normally there isn't too much of an issue. It's when you don't tell them and they find out, that's when they tend to get a little bit stroppy.
Yes. So my accountant said, why is your insurance so high? I said, well, I am actually insured for food poisoning as well. Not that I feed them, but I said, that's probably partly because of that. Oh, right. I've asked this question already, or you've answered this question, because I speak a lot to property groups around the country.
Yeah.
And one of the top questions is, what's the difference between hosting and a guest house? And the guest house is an active business specifically for making money from renting rooms, as opposed to being a live-in host where I'm going to say accidentally, but that's not quite the word, but incidentally rent rooms.
Yeah. And also for you, you can stop at any time. If you decided tomorrow, I'm not doing this anymore. But from a commercial entity, you probably would have contracts with people, things like that. So you'd have all of that element to think about, how do I close this business down? So again, they are different entities.
So there's a distinction between the tenancy law, planning permission,
unless you're in
rights.
Wales.
Oh, right.
Unless you're in Wales. If you're in Wales, even if you are just renting out a room and classed as a living host, it comes under planning permission. I think it's class C6, but don't quote me on the class. But there is, in Wales it is slightly different. It will require planning permission.
And can you walk us through a few of the main regulations that landlords and holiday let owners face, which don't apply to a live-in host?
I would say there's probably only one that applies to a living host, and that is the gas safety. So a landlord's annual gas safety is required whether you are a living host, whether you have someone who is coming to you as a lodger, whether you're in the private rented sector, whether it's social housing. Landlord's gas safety is law for everybody. That's probably the only one that really applies. You don't need EPC, you don't need EICR, which is your electrical safety, you don't need to give them how to rent guides, you don't need to protect deposits. All of those things don't come into play. So really the only thing is the gas safety is the only thing that I would say that would go across the board.
That's amazing. I was at a meeting of just around the table, it's actually here in Hatfield, for an hour and a half. And the conversation was all about the problems of tenants. And at the end of it, I said, have you got nothing positive to say about tenants? I said, I've got wonderful guests and I love it. And all you've been doing, they all laughed and said, well, yeah, of course. So some of the tenants are quite nice, but but they were all running HMOs, or most of them were.
HMOs are a different mentality, though.
Yes.
Very much
So talk us through
mentality.
that. First of all, what is an HMO for anyone who's listening who doesn't understand?
So an HMO is a house of multiple occupation. So that basically means the landlord doesn't live there. And you have, depending on where you are council-wise, it will be 3 or more unrelated people sharing. But to get a mandatory licensed HMO, it's 5 or more unrelated people. But different councils may want licenses for smaller HMOs. And basically the difference is everybody is renting a room in this shared house, but it's their main and principal home. It's where they live. They have exclusive possession of their room, which basically means the landlord cannot go in there regardless of whether there's earth, wind and fire. They cannot go in. They have to have the tenant's express permission to enter that room, but landlords can enter the communal areas in HMOs. Where some landlords fall down is they will give an assured short hold tenancy, as we know as an AST. They will give it to all of the occupants as a joint tenancy. That basically removes their ability to go through the front door without the landlord's permission, which is why it's always important to do HMOs on room-only ASTs.
That sounded very complicated. I'll stick to live-in hosting, I think. Because there's Section 21.
Yes.
Describe what that means and why I'm not subject to it.
So Section 21 is exactly what it says on the tin. It's Section 21 of the Housing Act 1988. And that was brought in when Margaret Thatcher decided that the housing system needs shaking up a bit. So prior to the Housing Act, we had what's called assured tenancies. So that provided quite a lot of security for tenants and made it quite difficult for landlords to get their properties back or evict if they needed to. The short hold element was introduced by Section 21, meaning that a landlord didn't need a reason or an excuse to evict. They could just give a Section 21 notice, giving 2 months' notice to the tenant with no reason whatsoever. I just want my house back, please. So that has pretty much been used through history now for landlords evicting tenants. The reason why you are not subject to this is because you don't have tenants. And we go back to the whole what creates a tenant, what makes a tenant. So there's quite a lot of case law to this. So one of the case laws that we work with probably on a daily basis is one which is called Street versus Mountford, which was 1985. And that basically set out the hallmarks of a tenancy. Because in this particular case, the landlord had issued a licence, written licence on it. When it came to eviction, the judge went, well, actually, no. They had exclusive possession, they paid rent, there was a set period. It created a tenancy regardless of what you put on that piece of paper. So we work from Street versus Mountford now pretty much a lot of the time. But because your guys don't have exclusive possession, you can move them at a moment's notice. It's not their main and principal home. They don't have that exclusive element. They don't have the protection. So they're outside the Housing Act, and therefore they're outside the Protection from Eviction Act as well.
I love it. Keep going. One question there is, if a guest comes and we agree that they can stay for 2 months, and then at the end of the 2 months they say, can I stay another 2 months? I mean, it's full-time, not as a weekly boarder, not coming weekly for a night or two. So they're constantly in the room for 2 months, 4 months, 6 months. When do they become a tenant? How do we define when the scenario changes?
Okay, it's a really good question, but quite easy to answer. At no point, just because of their length of time, do they become a tenant. So it's not the length of occupation, it's how they occupy.
Right, back to that.
Back to that, it is exactly back to that. So have you changed the setup? Are they now, have they now got a lock on their room and you can't go in there without their permission? Have you given them that exclusive possession of their room? That would be a key element. Have they got somewhere else to live? 9 times out of 10, guests, even if they're staying for a long period of time. So for example, if you had a guest that was staying because they were a contractor and they had a job down here building, Universal Studios for the next 2 years, that wouldn't mean they were a tenant because they stayed with you for the next 2 years, because this isn't their main and principal home. And those are the key things we look at. So length of occupation doesn't create a tenancy on its own.
I hadn't done my research properly before. I always thought that there was a time limit. So that
no, a lot of people think it's 6 months.
Yes, that's what I've heard.
I have read somewhere where people think if it's occupation for 3 months or more, they're automatically a tenant. A lot of that confusion comes from the urban myths of the tenancy itself. So an AST, an assured short hold tenancy that we spoke about before, can be as long as you want it to be, but a landlord can't issue the Section 21 within the first 4 months. Section 21 is 2 months' notice, ergo you've created a 6-month tenancy without even having to try. So I think the confusion comes from there. And the 3 months comes from a lot of landlord insurance policies will actually stipulate 3 months occupation is a tenancy.
Right.
So that's where the confusion comes from. But in legislation itself, there is no term that automatically creates a tenancy. Other things have to be part of it.
I'm so glad I answered that question, because I've heard from several people who I respect in the business give me the 6 month or the 3 month cut-off line. I've got a divorcee who's staying with me at the moment, and he's been with me on and off now for a year, but he's a teacher, so during the holidays he goes off, and if he comes back, he may be in a different room for the first day before I move him back into his preferred room.
Yeah.
And so I've always been under the impression that's good, because he's broken the 6 month run. But,
yeah. No, there was case law on that as well.
relax.
I think it was Brillout versus Landless, 1995, sorry. And that was exactly that. It was exactly that case. Somebody came to, it was actually an official guest house. They came to a guest house with their daughter. They stayed for 2 or 3 weeks at £100 a night. Then they extended, then they extended, then they extended. They weren't paying though. So the guest house said, well, you've got to go, you're not paying the bill. The occupant then went to the council, complained, I'm being evicted. The council intervened, and basically when it went to court, then had to go to appeal, and at appeal, which is what stands, it was basically, no, he was nothing more really than a bare licensee, so he didn't really have a lot of protection because of all of the other elements that didn't create a tenancy for him. So yeah, there's case law on that as well.
I'm feeling better as the conversation goes on. Not that I was worried, but it's just all my little niggles. You're taking them off, which is great. If someone is unsure about the local stipulations, for instance, I have heard that in Cornwall, if you have an Airbnb, you need to have a commercial rubbish bin. When I heard that, I thought, oh, if I was in Cornwall, I'd have to have a commercial. But then subsequently, I thought, hang on a minute. That is because they were going to a holiday let, which was run and managed on Airbnb. And therefore, if I was a live-in host, that would not apply. My question is, where does one start to look about what the local... You mentioned Wales earlier. Where would I start to look? Go onto the council website and it's like a thesaurus of... what do you press? What do you look for? What are the keywords you look for?
It really
Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And a lot of the times I think the council websites are perfectly designed on purpose for you to not be able to find anything. So I always look for policies when I'm working with the private sector, so for like discretionary housing payment policies and things like that, because they differ. Oh, you can't find them for love nor money. You've got to go in the back end of the system to actually pull out the policies. It's ridiculous. I would probably say the council websites are the correct place to go, but they're not always the best place to navigate. So if you're looking at hosting, I think when it comes to what's legislation, look at other businesses that are doing it in the same area. So you will have specific holiday let websites where you will put your, not necessarily Airbnb, but you will put your holiday let on this local website from a local agent who does holiday lets. They manage the holiday lets. On there, they usually have quite a lot of guides and fact sheets about how the local area and local council treat Airbnb, treat holiday lets. And it's always worth picking up the phone to them because they'll probably know exactly what legislation, if any, in the local area would cover you as a living host as well.
I'd never thought of doing that. Awesome.
Because it's their job to know at the end of the day.
Yes. We were having a chat just before we came down into the studio about AI. So I'm going to preempt the answer to the question is, if someone's looking for regulations and so on, why should they not use AI to do their research?
Because AI isn't clever enough. It just isn't. AI is only as good as the information you put in, and it's only as good as the question you ask it. So if you are wording a question in a way to get the answer you want, I promise you'll get the answer you want. It may not be the answer you need. Also, AI is searching the world of information. So if you want something specific to Cornwall, England, you're going to have to tell it Cornwall, England. Maybe even if the council area is split into boroughs, maybe even the borough that you're looking for. If you want it specifically to deep dive into a website, give it the website link. That's the only way you're going to start to actually get information. But it still bothers me when it comes to legislation, because I see it all the time. Even when I'm asking it questions, I had a lease that I was reviewing the other day, and I asked it a question specifically, and it came back and I was like, wow, what are you smoking? Because that's not even the question I asked you. And it's giving me this case law, and I Googled the case law, it didn't exist, because it just hallucinates a lot of the time. And that's really a big concern, because if you're putting your trust in AI, a lot of people put their trust into ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini. It's not there yet, because as much as it can absorb, you have to understand that these platforms are also a year behind. They're not up to date with what happened today. Like at the moment, the Renters' Rights Bill is back in the Houses of Parliament today. It's not going to know about that. It's not going to know about that until a year's time. So you can't ask it anything on that. Even now, they're still calling it the Renters' Reform Bill when you ask any of these AIs. They're still, don't trust it. Don't trust it. Come to an expert. Yes, we may charge you a little bit of money, but I promise you it's worth spending that money to avoid the fines that AI will probably cost you in the long run.
Well, again, in the conversation beforehand, you were saying that you even had solicitors and barristers coming with a... Tell that.
Yeah, so I've got a very good friend of mine who's a barrister. He was actually one of the youngest housing barristers in the UK for a while. And he has a fascination with law and AI, because he was seeing more and more when he was going to court as a barrister, the solicitors on the other side coming with this case law, going, yeah, we're going to win this case. And when they actually looked into it, it was a hallucination. They'd put it into AI. AI had just made it up or pulled it from another country. There was one that he looked at, and it was a case of illegal eviction. And this bundle that came forward was huge, and it was 700 odd pages. And when they looked at the case law being relied on, it was from New South Wales. Doesn't even come under English law. But because the question hadn't been asked correctly,
yes,
AI just went and searched everywhere for the answer. So AI thought it had done a really good job. It was probably very proud of itself. But actually what it produced was a bit of a shambles in front of the judge.
Bit of a nonsense. There's also, from AI, using AI, it doesn't have nuance.
Mm-hmm.
And you were explaining how, with the company you've just set up, just tell us a bit about the company you set up, and use that as the hook to explain what I mean by nuance.
Yeah, so I've just set up the Lettings Advice Service, which does exactly what it says on the tin. It provides advice to letting agents, property investors, whoever needs it, on what it means to rent property in the UK. We don't cover Scotland because that's a whole different kettle of fish when it comes to legislation. It's crazy up there. But we do cover England and Wales. I've got a specialist housing advisor based in Wales who knows the Welsh legislation inside out. But it was interesting when we set the business up that actually our unique selling point is that we have human advisors and not AI bots. Because there's so much more out there, so many platforms that, you know, you go onto any platform now and the chat box pops up in the bottom corner. You know, hi, I'm Apollo, your AI chat bot. What's the question? You ask it a question, it goes, I don't know the answer because you didn't word it correctly. So at least if you have a human advisor, not only can we answer the question, but we have also got the ability to realise the question you asked is not the question you needed to ask. We will unpack it and then tell you this was the question you should have asked, and by the way, here's your answer. Whereas I don't think AI is quite ready to unpack the way that people will word a question, or even using the wrong terminology. So if you are a letting agent and using the word lease instead of tenancy, which we get quite a lot if the letting agent is from abroad. So if someone's come over from a country where lease is the common terminology, yes, a tenancy is still technically a lease under English law. We don't call it a lease. We separate lease from tenancy and license. So if you say lease, AI is just going to look at leasehold legislation rather than tenancy legislation. So, yeah.
Sounds like an absolute minefield.
It is. It is a minefield. Absolutely. The legislation was bad enough before AI. It's even worse now.
AI is really confusing everybody by the sounds of it, just because I think there's unconscious bias, isn't there? There's all that sort of unconscious stuff, and I think when you write the question in your mind, you know the answer. So the way you phrase your question
100%.
is absolutely geared to getting you the answer you subconsciously want.
But there's also on the back of that, there's unconscious incompetence. You don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
So,
of course.
I've spoken to people where they've spurted out what AI has said to them, and I've gone, yeah, but you haven't considered this case law, and this case law. Then they've gone back, put that case law in and go, oh, well, it said that now. Well, yes, because you've prompted it with the correct information, but it didn't know that to start with, did it?
Quite. Planning permission and local licensing. Planning permission particularly. So how does a live-in host sit with planning permission? So,
like I say, unless you're in Wales, which does require planning permission, it's going to be something that's specific to your individual council. As a blanket, planning permission isn't required for you as an owner-occupier to rent out your rooms. Once it starts going over that commercial threshold, then yes, because you're changing the use of the dwelling from a residential dwelling to a commercial entity. So yes, absolutely. But again, if you're not changing that threshold, then planning doesn't come into it.
So the threshold being charging VAT, having staff, having your guests exclusive use of their rooms that you can't access because you give them that right. They don't move rooms, all those things that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, so the exclusive use and not moving rooms probably wouldn't come into that, because that then creates a tenancy, and that's a whole different world of pain. So while we're just sticking with the guest and the live-in landlord and all of this, then we'd be looking at it from the commercial entity. So you not living on site would turn it into a commercial, having staff. So people would say, well, what does it mean to have staff?
I was going to ask you that
genuinely
question,
mean like you've got the handymen and the cleaners and all? Not necessarily. It can be as simple as having somebody that manages your bookings for you. But again, it depends whether they are seen as an employee, how they're paid, is your company set up as a business, or are you still operating it sort of like as a sole trader, one-man band kind of thing? So again, a bit like what creates a tenancy, it's lots of elements added on rather than black and white set in legislation. This is a business, this is not a business.
Julia, I'm so glad you're here, because all these things that you're saying, I've sort of subconsciously lived, if that makes sense, and believed, and you're absolutely confirming it. So yes, good. Thank you so much.
But I think again, when we come back to councils, a lot of councils have their own neighbourhood plan as well, which you have to be very, very mindful of. So as a whole, when it comes to planning, you've got the National Planning Framework. This is something that we all have to work by. That tells you when you're building a property, how many parking spaces you're supposed to have, how big that parking space is supposed to be, all of this, it tells you all of that. That's the National Planning Framework. But each individual council can then have what's called as a neighbourhood plan. So that can decide individually in its own little area what it will and will not accept. This includes things like EV charging, for example. So in Harpington, I know that the neighbourhood plan for Harpington has banned any new EV chargers being installed because the actual area is at capacity and it can't take any more draw. So there's little things like that that need to be considered, because most people would think if you are having live-in guests, there might be an EV charger, might be a great draw for people. Great, they can bring their electric car. Be careful, it might actually breach the neighbourhood plan.
Right. Do EV charging installers check the neighbourhood plan, or they just... No. That's the answer I was expecting.
No, they don't. I couldn't care less. Give me the money.
Yeah, yes. Well, I have an electric car, and I've actually got solar panels on the roof. So whenever the sun shines, I put it in with the granny plug rather than the big 7 kilowatt, so that it trickle charges. So I'm driving on sunshine. Ooh, ooh.
In England. Okay.
Yeah, I know. It only works in the summer, but that really helps keep my mileage costs down. Are there? I think I know the answer to this from the conversation we've already had. So we're talking about the tax and business side of things, and the question is live-in hosting treated as a small business or more like a hobby income stream? Now, I'm going to try and preempt this answer to this one, which is it's VAT. The VAT will determine that. So therefore, if you're not at the VAT threshold in your turnover, it is a hobby income stream. But I mean, and that's a bit trite, but it's treated as a small business and not a commercial business.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back to what we were just talking about, the other elements. Do you have staff? Are you running it as a commercial entity? If you wanted to give it up tomorrow, like you literally wake up Monday morning and go, I can't do this. If it's a hobby for you, if it's just something you're doing on the side, like the side hustle as they call it all, then absolutely that's not really taken into commercial, because you could close it down tomorrow and no one cares. But if you're running it as a business and you've got guests that are pre-booked and this, that and the other, that all comes into the element of between business and no longer or not being a business.
Yeah. I think it was the bank holiday Monday in May or something like that. I had no guests at all. And that was the first time in 1,857 days or something.
Not that you're counting.
Well, I was intrigued because I looked at my booking sheet to say, when was the last time I did not have any? It felt really weird.
Yeah, I bet. It was quiet.
Yes, I know. Next day, everything went back to normal. I had the guests coming back again. But I absolutely love it. So I'm sure there will be a time where one day I'll wake up and think, do you know what? It's time to pack up. And then, and I can. You're absolutely right. Tomorrow, I could shut the books. I could contact everybody and say, sorry, off to Spain for the next.
And do it out there.
Yeah, well, maybe.
Well, you couldn't actually, because the restrictions in Europe for Airbnb is horrendous.
Yeah. Right. Yes. And even for live-in hosting. Right. Okay. So this discussion is really UK focused as it stands, I'd say, at the moment.
At the moment. So I had a holiday let business in France. I had 10 holiday lets out there. And the legislation out there is vicious, because they don't want people Airbnb-ing their properties. They want properties for local people. They don't mind you having a second home. They're happy with that. Leave it empty for 6 months of the year. Come over when you want. That's fine. Don't rent it out. Don't Airbnb it. Sacrilege. Don't do it.
But that's strange, isn't it? Because you'd have thought that the amount of, if I consider the amount of money that has been put into the local community by guests coming and staying with me from all around the world, they are supporting all the food shops, the takeaways, the restaurants, the clothing. You see some of the clothes that these people stock up on when they come and stay here. The clothing shops, they are literally feeding the local community. And so that wow.
Yeah, on the continent it's very different. You have a tourist tax over there as well. So every night you rent out your place, you have to pay a tourist tax, which I think when I was doing it, it was €2 a night, which doesn't sound a lot, but actually over a year, that's quite a lot that you've got to factor into then increasing your costs. I know there are parts of Spain that ban it outright. It's a complete ban, and I think it's a fine of like €10,000 if they find you renting your property out on Airbnb.
Is it specific to Airbnb?
It is specific to Airbnb, yes. They're very anti-Airbnb on the continent.
Why is that?
I think because, again, a lot of people have moved away, Airbnb'd the property, so it hasn't allowed local people to live locally. Everyone's had to move out of the area. And then when the tourists come in, unfortunately, the tourists may not be as respectful of the area as maybe the locals would have been. So they're finding that there's a lot more antisocial behaviour. Unfortunately, us Brits, when we go abroad, one beer is not the norm. We want to drink everything dry and then fall over a lot. So I think that hasn't helped.
That's sad, really.
Yeah, it is sad.
I was on a webinar with Brian Chesky, who was the guest speaker a couple of years ago, actually, and along with thousands of other people on the webinar. But he was saying that I think he almost specifically said it, that he was disappointed that Airbnb is now just seen as a short-term letting portal, because the whole philosophy is about local people looking after and hosting foreign or visitors and giving them the best experience of that area. Does that make sense? So it used to be travel like a human, and now that was the strapline of Airbnb, and now it is belong anywhere.
But that was the whole focus, I think, for Airbnb when it started.
Yes,
absolutely,
it was.
Because
yes.
It started with the guy actually sort of invented Airbnb by having, I think it was a blow-up mattress
Yeah, it was
in
an
a spare
airbed.
room or something,
Yes, that's
wasn't
right,
it?
yeah.
And that's where the whole air element came from. But I was listening to an interview that he did about 5 years ago, and he said that he basically wanted to shake up the private rented market, and he wanted to be the short let platform.
Complete different message to one I've just said.
Yeah, so that's what he wanted. He wanted to change the platform and almost rival the private rented sector. So, you know, the portals like On the Market, Rightmove, Zoopla, all of those, he wanted to basically be the next big thing. So that they already changed their vision about 5 years ago.
Oh, wow. The impression I got was he wanted to change it back to being the hosting.
I think with the Renters' Rights Bill round the corner, I think Airbnb will probably be the place that most private landlords will go now, from a fee perspective, but also trying to avoid the restrictions of the new legislation. So people just need to be careful.
Yes. Going back to the insurance and compliance, I've mentioned my insurers, my private insurers for the buildings insurance and so on, has agreed to insure 10 guests on site, including food poisoning, which I think is really funny, because I don't feed them. If they poison it, that they've done it themselves. From what this conversation is, what we've covered so far, the only other major certification regulation that needs to be considered is the gas safety, because we don't want the place blowing up. And that's where we got to, and that is it.
Absolutely, that's the only legal requirement. I think if it was me running a guest house, whatever you want to call it, I think I would want to put some kind of fire precautions in as well, because if you've got multiple people cooking at different times during the day and night, I'd probably want a fire blocker for the kitchen. That's a personal choice. That's not necessarily a legal requirement.
Yeah. Well, I have a fire blanket right next to the cooker, and the first door that I will change into a fire door is the kitchen door, for that very reason.
Yeah.
I showed you the shower that I made. This is a bit of an aside, but I showed you the shower that I made, which was behind the Arga, which was an original doorway, because I've now made the door where the window used to be overlooking the garden. That's now the entry door. So where the porch was, it used to be just a cupboard. It was turned into a cupboard when I blocked it off the other side.
Yeah.
But when we actually removed all the plasterboard in order to make the shower, the stud-work behind the Arga was charred by the Arga.
Them Argas get hot.
Yes, and unfortunately I'm a skinflint, and I hadn't actually been using the Arga because it's so blooming expensive to run. Yeah. It's just an objet d'art now and a great big lump of metal. But had I been using that Arga, I genuinely believe I'd have had a house fire.
Quite possibly.
And that was quite a shock, but a relief at the same time that it hadn't happened, because it would have just gone up the stud-work into the floorboards underneath one of the spare rooms, and the house would have gone up. Whew, that was a close one. That's nothing to do with any certification or anything. That was just an aside. Why do you think that live-in hosting has managed to remain under the regulatory radar when everything else in property seems to have gone berserk with restrictions?
What a fantastic question. I would probably say a lot of it has to do with the fact the government haven't realised they can tax it yet. If they can tax it, they like to regulate it because they like control. That's what regulation is, it's about control. But also, I think guests have much more fluidity in where they go, and if they don't like it, they can leave tomorrow. There's no tie-in. So where you're renting somebody, where it's your main and principal home, if you want to leave because your landlord's a bit of a dick, you have to go through a whole rigmarole. You have to give notice, but you can't give notice till the end of your fixed term. People are trapped, and there isn't usually somewhere else they can just up sticks and go to immediately. I think there is, because there's no real restriction for a guest. If they don't like it, they can just leave at 2 o'clock in the morning if they like. They can find a hotel or whatever. I think that's probably why there's not a lot of regulation, because people have so much fluid choice.
Interesting. I never thought of that dynamic. Yeah.
Why? Where were you thinking? What was your thought on that then?
Possibly because live-in hosting, I perceive, is not actually a big industry. Renting property out using Airbnb is, and I say that because when I say to people, "Oh, I'm a live-in host with Airbnb in Hatfield," a common answer I get is, "Why would anyone want to holiday in Hatfield?"
They're not necessarily holidaying.
I know.
Are they?
That's not. But it's the public perception that if you rent a room out on Airbnb, it's just a little sort of side hustle, you know. If you have your own property where you are renting it out as a holiday let or as a self-contained unit because it's an empty property and you're using Airbnb as the letting portal, that's proper business, you know. But you've got someone in your spare room. Oh, really? Well, that's not a real business, and that's been my perception. But so, do you think? How long do you think Airbnb's got as a live-in host before government starts to mess it up?
They're already messing it up. I mean, when the Tories were in, they were already putting the serviced accommodation bill through Parliament. Unlike the Renters' Rights Bill, it wasn't far enough through. So when Rishi called the general election, it went in the shredder, never to be seen again. But I know Labour are looking at bringing in legislation for the serviced accommodation industry. Now, whether they would class the type of business that you run as serviced accommodation, because basically there is no service. You're not going in and cleaning the rooms. You're not providing them food. There is no service. Whether it would come under that, I don't know. But they're also putting the short-term accommodation bill through Parliament as well. So legislation is there, but it's whether it gets any weight behind it, because there's a lot of legislation going through Parliament at the moment, and obviously with Gaza and everything else that's going on, there's a lot for Parliament to consider, and they can only be in one place at a time when they're looking at legislation. So I think it's probably something that they'd like to do, but whether it actually comes to fruition, I think is a very different thing.
Yeah. Well, long may it not, because I truly believe that the service that live-in hosts offer to their visitors is invaluable.
Yeah.
I have guests from over 40 countries in the world. Most of them, well, not most of them, a lot of them are youngsters coming to the university in the town. They turn up. It's the first time they've been out of their home country. It's the first time they've lived away from home. They haven't a Scooby-Doo about how life really works. I had one lad come from India, and it was about the second thing he said after he said hello, was that he was so homesick he nearly didn't leave Heathrow and got on a plane back home. Fortunately, he stayed, and actually he's now a lodger in one of my neighbours' homes, and he has held a job down for 2 years now and absolutely loving it. So fortunately, it worked out.
That's the other side of it, though, isn't it? It isn't just about you having guests. It's about what you provide to those guests. So for him, if he'd coming over and just moving into an HMO or just moving into a hotel, he maybe wouldn't have got that sort of not necessarily that you physically hugged him, but that big hug when he got here and gone, it's okay.
The avuncular
England, we're
touch.
not going to eat you, it's all right.
Yes.
You know, and I think maybe that helped him to get over that homesickness because he felt home in a way.
Yes.
And that's got to be considered as well. It isn't just one-sided in these types of industry. It's two-sided. There's two people in that.
Absolutely right, Julia. And, you know, literally yesterday, I had a young lad come over from Pakistan under exactly those same circumstances. He didn't admit whether he was homesick or not. But before he's actually moving out to another room which is managed by students who live there. And I know these people very well because they've helped me a lot. And he's going to be in great hands. He really is. But just about 4 hours before he was due to leave, he said, "Can I stay? Because I like it here." And that's because of the environment that I've been able to create. And one of the things that I say when I give my talks is what's never mentioned is the opportunity to mentor.
Yeah.
So 2 days ago, There was an Indian lad who now lives in Germany, he's studying in Germany.
Mm-hmm.
He came over here, he came to see me with a bottle of wine to say thank you, because he helped me, he worked here to help me for 6 months. I taught him how to mow lawns, how to trim hedges, how to do wire a plug, how to manage the laundry, how to... I gave him confidence because I threw him in at the deep end to greet guests when I wasn't here. All those life skills. And at the end, he was so good at it, I gave him a letter of recommendation.
Yeah.
He decided he wanted to live in Berlin, in a certain area, but the rent was very high. He contacted 15 Airbnb hosts and said, would you like a live-in host? And I'll offset my rent with work, and I will run your property for you. And he handed the note that I'd written for him, and 5 people responded, and he moved in with one person. And so he said it gets better than that, because the place that I'm staying in is above a repair shop for electronics, and I love repairing electronics. So when I finished hosting, I'd go downstairs and earn the rest of my rent.
Perfect.
So, and he said he has told other friends to do that, and they haven't been as successful like him because he didn't have that letter.
Yeah.
And they didn't have the experience. They're just going into it cold. And that's just one story. Another guy, I've got a fantastic note from him saying, Neil, I've just let you know, I'm in Vietnam. I've got my dream job of working in reality television, and
Okay.
each to their own. And he said, it's all because the reason I got it is because of the skills that you taught me across the kitchen table, which is about how to relate to people, the people skills and so on.
The younger generation aren't taught that.
No.
They interact on their devices. They don't have social skills anymore. It's frightening. You know, my other half's got a stepson. Well, my other half's got a son. He's not my stepson because we're not married, but anyway.
Yeah.
But he just literally, the things I can't get my head around is you and I would pick up the phone and have a conversation.
Yep.
Right? That's it. 5 minutes of our life. We're done and dusted. Answers we've got. Off we go and live our lives. They have to have a conversation, but voice notes. I'm like, why didn't you just talk to each other? What is that about? Oh, no, we don't ring each other. But you'll send each other voice notes answering a question that they've just asked you in a voice.
3 seconds later, yeah.
I just cannot get my head around this. I really can't. But I find that with letting agents as well. I find that with landlords when I'm working. When something goes wrong, nobody wants to pick up the phone and go, is everything all right? Everybody wants to send an email or a text or a WhatsApp. I hate WhatsApp groups for tenants. Don't get me started on that. Don't get me started on that. That's a whole different video. But the problem is when somebody is in crisis, so for example, your tenant hasn't paid their rent, they're in crisis, they will read the text, the email, in the frame of mind they are in, not the tone you have spent 2 hours trying to perfect to send it in.
Yes.
But if you pick up the phone, they can immediately hear in your voice that you're not actually, demanding money with menaces, you're not trying to illegally evict them, where's my money, all this. They can tell, and you can tell with them whether they're upset, frightened, all of this. But people don't communicate anymore.
No.
I don't understand.
No.
The wheels are going to fall off the world unless we start communicating.
Yeah, yeah. And I do have youngsters come and help me on a fairly regular basis. And it is I say to them, okay, it may look like I'm asking you to change the beds and vacuum the floor. But that is just a mechanism for me to teach you stuff. Mm-hmm. And I make it blatantly clear, I'm going to teach you life skills. I'm going to teach you communication skills. I'm going to teach you time management skills.
Yeah.
We're going to use the washing machine as the method for doing it. In fact, my last podcast was about exactly that, time hack, and the conversation I had with someone who's just starting helping me.
Yeah.
And so it's far more than just renting a room.
It is. And I think they're just not taught life skills anymore, full stop. I mean, I remember when I was working for a homeless charity, the method we used was street homeless to the night shelter, and then they spent 2 years in our HMOs with support. And I had one young lad, he was 18, and he kept paying his rent late every month and short. And my manager was on my back, right, we need to evict him, we need to evict him. I'm like, come on, he's home, you know, if it weren't for us, he's homeless, that's why he's with us. Surely we're just creating a cycle, we're not breaking it if we then now evict him. So I managed to get hold of him, which is never easy getting hold of any of these people because their lives are so chaotic. They don't run on the same, you know, paths that we do. They don't stick to 9-to-5 jobs. They're all over the place. Sometimes they're self-medicating and all this. It's chaotic. So I managed to get hold of this lad and I said, right, I'm coming round and we're going to have a chat. So we sat down at the kitchen and made sure nobody else was in the house. It was just us two. And I'm like, what's going on with the rent? I said, do you owe someone money? Are you buying drugs? What's going on? If I know what the problem is, I can solve it. If I don't know what the problem is, I can't solve it. And he's just sitting there and he's not giving me eye contact. I'm like, come on, if you can't tell me, then you're going to be evicted because I can't solve the problem. And he just burst into tears. I was like, oh God, here we go. What do I do now? I'm not a cryy person. I'm like, oh, okay. And he just looked at me and he went, I don't know how to use the washing machine. I went, what's that got to do with the price of fish? Well, it turned out he was taking his washing to the laundrette every week and paying the laundrette, which is why he couldn't afford to pay his rent, because he didn't know how to use the washing machine. And I was like, right, okay. So I gave him a washing machine lesson and some instructions, and I thought, right, we now need to do that as a business. So I then wrote a whole plan of teaching tenants how to be good tenants so they could then move on to their new settled accommodation. So we did everything. We did, you know, the basic how to use a microwave, how to make a cup of tea, but we did it for everybody so he didn't feel that he was, you know, isolated or penalised in any way, and using the washing machine. And we then hooked up with a local church and did cooking classes and things like that. So it just kind of grew and grew and grew. And we ended up working with the local council, who allowed, if the tenants went through this training course, they would then got extra points to bid on the housing register. So it actually made sense for them to go through this training to be a good tenant, actually got them to the point where they could have extra points to bid and then move on to their own accommodation. But yeah, it all started with a young lad who wasn't paying his rent.
I love that story. Absolutely love that. Presses all my bells. Yeah, amazing. And it's not just homeless persons. So I've got a guest just now who's come from a very cold climate and absolutely lovely. And he's laundered his bedding. And I couldn't understand why was this. He laundered everything except his duvet cover. So the mattress protector, the sheet, the pillowcases, but not the duvet cover. And I was thinking, well, maybe he thinks it's not worthy of being washed. And then, so I didn't pay much more attention, but it struck me as odd. This morning, the mattress protector was back in the washing machine. I was thinking, why? So anyway, I went and knocked on the door, and it transpired that he thought that the duvet was a blanket. You used it in the way that, because he's never experienced a duvet before. So he had the undersheet. He did have a mattress protector on. He managed to find another one, an undersheet. Then the duvet cover that I'd given him was like unfilled and was like a sheet. And then the duvet that was meant to be covered with the duvet cover was just lying there like a blanket. And I just thought, how stupid of me to assume that everybody knows what a duvet is. He didn't. And so I unpopped the duvet and took it out. He went, oh. And this is someone who's doing a master's degree. So he's not stupid.
No.
It's just well, how can he know if he's never covered?
Isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
It's cultural.
Yes, yeah. And I felt very humbled. I felt almost foolish that I'd expected him. But at least I got my answer as to why he hadn't washed the duvet cover. Well, I think that's... Is there anything else that you think people should know about live-in hosting that we haven't covered? Because I was going to ask, if someone is thinking about hosting a spare room, what would be the minimum that they should be cognizant of in terms of regulations and not getting into trouble with the broader sense of the law?
I mean, like I said, it just kind of goes back to everything we've already mentioned, really. Make sure that your guests coming have somewhere else that they live as a permanent and main home. Don't create a tenancy by accident. But if you're living in the property still, then you're not going to be able to do that, because living landlords cannot create a tenancy. It's impossible. They will always be an excluded licensee. But it's just understanding, first of all, are you the right person to do that role? Because I know for sure I wouldn't like strangers coming in and out of my home. That is not for me. That my private space, that's fine. However, you and I were talking about the caravan that I have on the drive may be an option, because then they're not coming in the house. So I just think you have to be the right person to start with. Can you put the character on of being the host all the time? Because sometimes if you're having a really bad day, you've still got to be the hostess with the mostess. Are you the right person? And then, like I say, with the legislation, it's just being mindful of your neighbourhood plan, what your local council has, if they have any specific restrictions on guest houses in any way, making sure you don't cross that threshold into commercial. But ultimately, as a living landlord or a living host, as long as you are doing everything how you would want to be treated, then other than the gas certificate, there's not really much else to consider.
Ka-ching.
Absolutely. And obviously declaring it to the tax man, but I'm not a tax expert, so.
Oh yes, yeah. Well, yes, actually that is a very valid point, because people say, oh, is it taxable? Yes, it is, because it's an income. Absolutely, yes. And you should be very clear about how the finances work, and I would recommend that you found someone an accountant, anyone listening, to get an accountant, because they can actually distill out of your expenses what is tax deductible and what isn't. And there's capital gain and all sorts of things. So we're in the studio here, I built that. Well, I can't claim it all in one lump. It's going to be amortised over goodness knows how many years and things like that. Well, they know that's their job. That's their job. Yeah. But so yes, you do need to declare it as tax. But you can offset an awful lot of stuff against it, which means that you buy things with pre-tax money rather than post-tax money, by which I mean, in order to have £10 in your pocket to spend on a new set of cutlery, you don't have to have earned £15 to be taxed on it, to be left with £10. You can actually earn £10, spend it on the cutlery, and that's what it's cost you. And I think a lot of people don't realise that. And don't understand that subtle difference, but it makes a huge difference to the efficiency with which you can spend your money.
Yeah, absolutely.
If you could sum up the beauty of live-in hosting in one sentence, what would you say to someone who's on the fence?
Oh, what a great question. I would probably say simplicity. Because compared to every other form of property strategy, it's pretty damn simple.
I love it. Yes. I totally agree with you, because it is.
Yeah, I would probably say simplicity.
Amazing. And finally, the most important question, Julie, is where can listeners find you?
So listeners can find me pretty much anywhere. I'm kind of everywhere, to be honest with you. You can find me on all the social media platforms. It's Julie Ford TV. And on LinkedIn, it's just my name, Julie Ford. But if you want to get in touch with me or you want to use my services, then it is the lettingsadviceservice.co.uk.
It's straightforward. So anyone can send you a message on LinkedIn, send you an email to that email address. Yeah. And your website, I guess, outlines exactly what you do.
Yeah, and there's a contact form on there as well. So if anyone wants to get in touch, they can use the contact form on the website as well.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you very, very much for being my guest. I've thoroughly enjoyed it.